Chapter 11 The Storm A deeper, slower voice now took form in David's mind. It said gravely, "I greet you, creature. It is a good name Rara has just given you." The feminine voice said, "I shall make way for you, Rara." By the loss of a faint touch upon his mind, David became unmistakably aware that the owner of the feminine voice was no longer in mental contact. He turned warily, laboring once more under the illusion that there was direction to these voices, and finding his untrained mind still attempting to interpret in the old and adequate ways something with which it had never before come into contact. The voice came from a direction, of course. It was within his mind. The creature of the deep voice gauged the difficulty. It said, "You are disturbed by the failure of your sense equipment to detect me, and I do not wish you to be disturbed. I could adopt the outward physical appearance of a creature such as yourself, but that would be a poor and undignified imposture. Will this suffice?" David Starr watched the glimmer appear in the air before him. It was a soft streak of blue-green light about 7 feet high and a foot wide. He said calmly, "That is quite sufficient." The deep voice said, "Good! Now let me explain who I am. I am the administrator of your... The report of the capture of a live specimen of the new surface life came to me as a matter of course. I will examine your mind." The office of the new being had been a jumble of sound and nothing more, to David, but he had caught the unmistakable sense of dignity and responsibility that accompanied it. "Nevertheless," he said firmly, "I would much prefer that you remained outside my mind." "Your modesty," said the deep voice, "is quite understandable and praiseworthy. I should explain that my inspection would be confined most carefully to outer fringes only. I would only avoid very scrupulously any intrusion on your inner privacy." David tensed his muscles uselessly. For long minutes there was nothing. Even the elusive feathery touch upon his mind that had once been present when the owner of the feminine voice had probed it, was absent from this new and more experienced inspection. And yet David was aware, without knowing how he could possibly be aware, of the compartments of his mind being delicately opened, then closed, without pain or disturbance. The deep voice said, "I thank you. You will be released very shortly and returned to the surface." David said defiantly, "What have you found in my mind?" "Enough to pity your fellows. We of the inner life were once like yourself, so we have some comprehension of it. You people are out of balance with the universe. You have a questioning mind that seeks to understand what it dimly senses, without possessing the truer, deeper senses that alone can reveal reality to you. In your futile seeking after the shadows that encompass you, you drive through space to the outermost limits of the galaxy. It is as I have said. Alshira has named you well. You are a race of space rangers indeed. Yet what is the use of your ranging? The true victory is within. To understand the material universe, you must first become divorced from it as we are. We have turned away from the stars and toward ourselves. We have retreated to the caverns of our one world and abandoned our bodies. With us there is no longer death, except when a mind would rest, or birth, except when a mind gone to rest must be replaced." David said, "Yet you are not all sufficient to yourselves. Some of you suffer from curiosity. The being who spoke to me before wished to know of Earth." "Aurora is recently born. Her days are not equal to 100 revolutions of the planet about the sun. Her control of thought patterns is imperfect. We who are mature can easily conceive all the various designs to which your Earth history could have been woven. Few of them would be comprehensible to yourself, and not in an infinity of years could we have exhausted the thoughts possible in the consideration of your one world. And each thought would have been as fascinating and stimulating as the one thought which happened to represent reality. In time, we will learn that this is so. Yet you yourself take the trouble to examine my mind." "In order that I may make certain of that which I previously merely suspected. Your race has the capacity for growth. Under the best circumstances, 1,000,000 revolutions of our planet, A moment in the life of the galaxy may see it achieved in your life. That would be good. My race would have a companion in eternity, and companionship would benefit us mutually." "You say we may achieve it," said David cautiously. "Your species have certain tendencies my people never had. From your mind I can see that there are tendencies against the welfare of the all." "If you speak of such things as crime and war, then you see in my mind that the vast majority of humans fights the antisocial tendencies, and that, though our progress against them is slow, it is certain." "I see that. I see more. I see that you yourself are eager for the welfare of the all. You have a strong and healthy mind, the absence of which I would not be sorry to see made into one of ours. I would like to help you in your strivings." "How?" demanded David. "Your mind is full of suspicion again. Relieve your tension. My help would not be through personal interference in the activities of your people, I assure you. Such interference would be incomprehensible to yourselves and undignified for myself. Let me suggest instead the two inadequacies which you are most aware of in yourself. First, that since you are composed of unstable ingredients, you are a creature of no permanence. Not only will you decompose and dissolve in a few revolutions of the planet, but if before then you are subject to any of 1,000 different stresses, you will die. Secondly, you feel that you can work best in secrecy, yet not long ago a fellow creature recognized your true identity, or that you had pretended to a different identity altogether. Is what I have said true?" David said, "It is true, but what can you do about it?" The deep voice said, "It is already done and in your hand." And there was a soft textured something in David Starr's hand. His fingers almost let it drop before they realized they were holding it. It was a nearly weightless strip of, well, of what? The deep voice answered the unspoken thought placidly. "It is neither gauze, nor fibre, nor plastic, nor metal. It does not matter at all as your mind understands matter. It is rubber. Put it over your eyes." David did as he was told, and it sprang from his hands as though it had a primitive life of its own, folding softly and warmly against every fold of structure of his forehead, eyes, and nose. Yet it did not prevent him from breathing or from blinking his eyes. "What has been accomplished?" he asked. Before the words were out of his mouth there was a mirror before him, manufactured of energy as silently and quickly as thought itself. In it he could see himself but dimly. His farm boy costume, from hip boots to wide lapels, peered out of focus through a shadowy mist that changed continuously, as though it were a thin smoke that drifted yet never vanished. From his upper lip to the top of his head all was lost in a shimmer of light that blazed without blinding, and through which nothing could be seen. As he stared, the mirror vanished, returning to the store of energy from which it had been momentarily withdrawn. David asked wonderingly, "Is this how I would appear to others?" "Yes, if those that had only the sensory equipment you yourself have." "Yet I can see perfectly. That means the light rays enter the shield. Why may they not leave then and reveal my face?" "They do leave as you say, but they are changed in the passage and reveal only what you see in the mirror. To explain that properly I must use concepts lacking in your mind understanding." "And the rest?" David's hands moved slowly over the smoke that encircled him. He felt nothing. The deep voice again answers the voiceless thought. "You feel nothing. Yet what appears to you as smoke is a barrier which is resistant to short-wave radiation and impassable to material objects of larger than molecule size." "You mean it is a personal force shield?" "That is a crude description, yes." David said, "Great galaxy, this is impossible. It's been definitely proven that no force field small enough to protect a man from radiation and from material inertia can be generated by any machine capable of being carried by a man." "And so it is to any science which your fellows are capable of evolving. But that mask you wear is not a power source. It is instead a stored device of energy which, for instance, can be derived from a few moments' exposure to sun radiating as strong as ours is from the distance of this planet. It is, further, a mechanism for releasing energy at mental demand. Since your own mind is incapable of controlling the power, it has been adjusted to the characteristics of your mind and will operate automatically as needed. Remove the mask now." David lifted his hand to his eyes, and again, responsive to his will, the mask fell away and was only a strip of gauze in his hand. The deep voice spoke for a last time. "And now you must leave us, Space Ranger." And as gently as can be imagined, consciousness left David Starr. Nor was there any transition in his return to consciousness. It came back in its entirety. There wasn't even a moment's certainty as to his whereabouts, none of the "where am I" attitude. He knew with surety that he was standing on his good 2 legs upon the surface of Mars, that he was wearing the nose-piece again and breathing through it, that behind him was the exact place at the lip of the fissure where he had thrust the rope ladder's anchor for the beginning of the descent, that to his left, half hidden among the rocks, was the scooter which Bigman had left behind. He even knew the exact manner in which he had been returned to the surface. It was not memory, it was information deliberately inserted into his mind, probably as a final device to impress him with the power of the Martians over matter-energy interconversations. They dissolved the tunnel to the surface for him. They had lifted him against gravity at almost rocket speed, turning the solid rock to energy before him, and congealing the energy to rock once more behind him, until he was standing on the planet's outer skin once more. There were even words in his mind that he had never consciously heard. They were in the feminine voice of the caverns, and the words were simply these: "Have no fear, Space Ranger!" He stepped forward and was aware that the warm, earth-like surroundings that had been prepared for him in the cavern below no longer existed. He felt the cold more for the contrast, and the wind was stronger than any he had felt yet on Mars. The sun was low in the east as it had been when he first descended the fissure. Was that the previous dawn? He had no way of judging the passage of time during his unconscious intervals, but he felt certain his descent had not been more than 2 dawns before, anyway. There was a difference to the sky. It seemed bluer and the sun was redder. David frowned thoughtfully for a moment, then shrugged. He was becoming accustomed to the Martian landscape, that was all. He was beginning to seem more familiar and, through habit, he was interpreting it in the old earthly patterns. Meanwhile, it would be better to begin the return to the farm dome immediately. The scooter was by no means as quick as the sand car, nor as comfortable. The less time spent on it, the better. He took approximate sightings among the rock formations, and felt like an old hand because of it. The farm boys found their way across the seemed trackless desert by just this method. They would sight along a rock that looked like a watermelon on a hat, proceed in that direction until level with the one that looked like a spaceship with 2 off-center jets, and head beyond it and a farther rock that looked like a box with its top stove in. It was a crude method, but it required no instruments other than a retentive memory and a picturesque imagination, and the farm boys had that in plenty. David was following the route Bigman had recommended for Speedy's return, with the least chance of going wrong among the less spectacular formations. The scooter jounced along, leaping crazily when it struck ridges and kicking up the dusk when it turned. David rode with it, digging his heels firmly into the sockets provided for them, and holding a metal steering leash tightly in each hand. He made no effort to cut his speed. Even if the vehicle turned over, there would be little chance for him to harm himself under Martian gravity. It was another consideration that stopped him. The queer taste in his mouth and the itch along the side of his jawbone and along the lines of his backbone. There was a faint grittiness in his mouth, and he looked back with distaste at the plume of dust that jetted out behind him, like rocket exhaust. Strange that it should work its way forward and around him to fill its mouth as it did. Forward and around. Great galaxy! The thought that had come to him at that moment clammed a cold, stifling hand upon his heart and throat. He slowed the scooter and headed for a rocky ridge where it could stir up no dust. Then he stopped it and waited for the air to clear. But it didn't. His tongue worked about, tasting the inside of his mouth and shrinking away from the increased roughness that came of fine grit. He looked at the redder sun and bluer sky with new understanding. It was the general dust in the air that was scattering more light, taking the blue for the sun and adding it to the sky in general. His lips were growing dry and the itching was spreading. There was no longer doubt about it, and with a grim intensity of purpose he flung himself upon his scooter and dashed at top speed across the rocks, gravel, and dust. Dust! Dust! Even on Earth men knew intimately of the Martian dust storm, which resembled only in sound the sandstorm of the dead earthly deserts. It was the deadliest storm known to the inhabited solar system. No man, caught as David Starr was now, without a sand car's protection, miles from the nearest shelter, had ever, in all the history of Mars, survived a dust storm. Men had rolled in death throes within 50 feet of a dome, unable to make the distance, while observers within neither dared nor could sally to the rescue without a sand car. David Starr knew that only minutes separated him from the same agonizing death. Already the dust was creeping remorselessly between his nose-piece and the skin of his face. He could feel it in his watering, blinking eyes. Well, I guess we found out the reason why this chapter was labeled The Storm. Will David Starr survive? I sure hope so. There are more books. Alright. Hope you enjoyed and have a good day. Bye!